2019, a woman named Marisol Reyes stood barefoot on the marble floor of a palace she was never supposed to enter. She was 7 months pregnant, wearing a uniform she'd ironed that morning with a travel iron she'd bought in Jeddah for 12 riyals. And a man worth $11 billion was on his knees in front of her, not proposing, not begging, apologizing. The apology would take 4 minutes. It would cost him his inheritance. And the sound she remembers most clearly from that moment isn't his voice. It's the hum of the central air conditioning and the distant call to prayer bleeding through the window, both at once, as if even the building couldn't decide whether this was sacred or ordinary. But I'm telling you the middle. Let me go back. Marisol was born in Taguig, Metro Manila, in a neighborhood where the rooftops are made of corrugated tin and the rain sounds like God is drumming with both hands. Her mother sold banana Q on the corner of General Santos Avenue, and her father drove a jeepney route so long that he sometimes slept in it rather than come home. She was the second of 5 children, not the oldest, so she wasn't the responsible one, not the youngest, so she wasn't the baby. Marisol was the invisible one, the one who learned early that the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding everything together. She graduated from a 2-year vocational program in hospitality services, not because she loved hospitality, because it was the fastest path to an overseas contract. And overseas meant money, and money meant her younger sister could go to a real university, and her mother could stop standing over a vat of boiling oil for 9 hours a day. That's the math, not dreams, math. At 23, Marisol signed with a recruitment agency in Quezon City that placed domestic workers in the Gulf states. She paid a placement fee she didn't have, borrowed it from a cousin who charged interest she couldn't afford, and in September of 2016, she boarded a plane to Riyadh with a suitcase held together with a nylon strap and a photocopy of a contract that promised her 1,800 riyals a month, about $480, for round-the-clock availability. Her employer was a mid-level member of a Saudi family with enough money to have staff, but not enough status to be in any newspaper. She cleaned, she cooked. She raised 2 children who called her ate, the Filipino word for older sister, because their mother was always somewhere else, shopping in Dubai, visiting relatives in Jeddah, living a life that required Marisol to live hers in the margins. She did this for 2 years, no days off, 1 phone call home per week, always on Friday, always exactly 20 minutes because the Wi-Fi in the staff quarters barely held a signal. She sent home 80% of her salary, kept the rest in an envelope under her mattress, and by rest, I mean $96 a month to exist on. I tell you this not for sympathy. I tell you this because you need to understand the altitude from which she fell. And fell is the wrong word. She was pushed. In January of 2018, the family she worked for hosted a private gathering. Not a party. Saudis of that class don't throw parties in the way you're imagining. This was a family meeting, like a gathering of cousins and uncles and business associates, the kind of evening where alliances are adjusted and disappointments are delivered with mint tea. Marisol was assigned to the women's modulus, serving coffee, clearing plates, keeping the children quiet in a back room when they grew restless. That's where she first encountered Khalid. Not Prince Khalid, not yet. Just Khalid, a man in a white thobe who walked into the children's room because his niece had started crying and no one else seemed to hear her. He picked the girl up, bounced her on his knee, made a sound with his mouth that was somewhere between a whistle and a hum, and the child stopped crying in 8 seconds. Marisol watched from the corner where she was folding a blanket. He looked at her, didn't smile, just nodded, said, "Well, she only cries because the room is too cold. Everyone always forgets." That was it. That was the entire first meeting. A man noticed a cold room and a crying child, and something about the way he said it, not to impress her, not even really to her, just out loud like a fact he was tired of repeating, stayed with Marisol longer than it should have. She didn't know he was Khalid bin Faisal al-Rashid. She didn't know his father controlled one of the largest private construction firms in the kingdom. She didn't know that the watch on his wrist cost more than her father would earn in 15 years. She knew he noticed temperature. That's all. Before I tell you how these two ended up in a situation that nobody, not his family, not hers, not the embassy, not the tabloids, could have predicted, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from right now. Manila, Riyadh, London, Lagos, wherever you are, say it. I want to know who's in this room with me. Now, the second time Marisol saw Khalid was not at a family gathering. It was at a hospital. 3 months after that night, in April of 2018, Marisol collapsed in the kitchen of her employer's home. She'd been having dizzy spells for weeks, skipping meals to save money, drinking instant coffee on an empty stomach because it was the only thing that kept her vertical during 18-hour shifts. Her employer's wife, a woman named Nora, drove her to a clinic, not out of affection, but because a sick maid is an inconvenience, and inconveniences must be resolved quickly. The doctor ran tests. Thus Marisol sat on a paper-covered table in a room that smelled like rubbing alcohol and air freshener. The specific combination that makes every clinic in the Gulf feel like it's trying too hard to be sterile. She expected anemia, maybe dehydration, something fixable with vitamins and a lecture about eating properly. The doctor told her she was pregnant, 11 weeks. The floor didn't drop out from under her. That's what people say. The floor dropped out. No. For Marisol, the floor stayed exactly where it was. And that was the problem. She was still standing in a clinic in Riyadh, still wearing her uniform, still holding her employer's insurance card, and now she was pregnant in a country where pregnancy outside of marriage could mean arrest, deportation, prison. The father was a man named Joel, a Filipino electrician she'd been seeing in secret for 5 months. They'd met at a gathering of overseas workers in a rented apartment in Al-Batha, the kind of gathering where the music is kept low and the curtains are drawn and everyone knows the stakes of being caught. Joel was kind. Joel was present. Joel made her laugh by doing impressions of their recruitment agent back in Manila, a man with a mustache like a cartoon villain who promised everyone air-conditioned rooms and delivered bunk beds. But Joel's contract had ended 2 weeks before the clinic visit. He was already back in Iloilo. He didn't know. Marisol sat in the clinic parking lot for 40 minutes after the appointment, in the backseat of Nora's Range Rover, while Nora went inside a pharmacy. She held her phone with both hands and stared at Joel's last message. A photo of his nephew's birthday party, balloons taped to a concrete wall, a child grinning with icing on his chin, and she could not bring herself to type a single word. She told no one. For 6 weeks, she told no one. She wore her uniform looser, ate crackers in the bathroom, and worked. That's what invisible people do. They work through the thing that should stop them because stopping has never been an option that belonged to them. But bodies don't keep secrets the way minds do. In late May, Nora noticed, not with concern, with the quiet fury of someone whose household is about to become complicated. Nora didn't yell. She called her husband. Her husband called his brother. His brother called a lawyer. And within 72 hours, Marisol was removed from the household, her passport confiscated. It had been confiscated since the day she arrived, actually, let's be honest about that. And she was placed in a room in a building that functioned as an informal holding facility for domestic workers who had, in the language of the paperwork, violated the terms of their residency. The room had one window, painted shut, a mattress on the floor, a bathroom with no lock, and 4 other women, all Filipino, all waiting for deportation or worse. Marisol was 25 years old and 17 weeks pregnant, and she had 42 riyals hidden in the lining of her bag. This is the part of the story where you might expect a rescue, where the prince appears, where the helicopter lands. That's not how it happened. What happened was a phone call. One of the women in the room, a woman named Divina, 41 from Pampanga, who'd been there for 3 weeks because she'd refused to work for a family that hit her, had memorized a number. Not an embassy number, not a lawyer. The number belonged to a Saudi woman named Amira, who ran an unofficial network, a web of contacts and safe houses that helped migrant workers in crisis. Amira wasn't an activist in the way the word usually means. She didn't give speeches or file reports. She answered phone calls at 2 in the morning and drove her own car to places where women were being held, and she argued in Arabic with men who were not used to being argued with. Divina made the call. Amira answered. 3 days later, Marisol was moved, not freed, moved, transferred from the informal holding room to the actual domestic workers' shelter run by the Philippine embassy. A step up only in the sense that the mattress had a frame and the bathroom had a door that locked. But Amira's involvement had triggered something else. A thread had been pulled, because Amira's cousin was married to a man who worked for the Al-Rashid family. And that cousin mentioned casually over dinner that a pregnant Filipina had been pulled from a household in the neighborhood. Just conversation, just gossip, the kind that moves through Riyadh's social networks like weather. Khalid heard it. Not directly. It passed through 2 more people before it reached him, distorted the way all passed-along stories are. By the time it got to Khalid, the details were wrong. The woman was Indonesian, not Filipino. She was being detained by police, not the embassy. But something about the shape of the story snagged on him. A pregnant domestic worker, alone, no passport. He didn't think of Marisol specifically. He didn't even remember her name. What he remembered, though he couldn't have articulated it, was the corner of that room where a woman had been folding a blanket with the kind of care that most people reserve for things they own, not things they're cleaning up. Khalid made a phone call of his own. Not to help a stranger. He would later admit this. But because he was bored and restless and 29, and increasingly aware that the empire his father was building felt like a house he'd been assigned to rather than one he'd chosen. He called Amira. He'd met her once at a charity event, and the kind where wealthy Saudis write checks and feel briefly absolved. Amira told him the truth. Philippine embassy shelter, pregnant, no passport, no legal representation, facing deportation and possible criminal charges under Saudi morality laws that were technically being reformed but practically still enforced at the discretion of local officials. Khalid visited the shelter on a Tuesday. He went alone. No driver. He parked his Aston Martin, a car worth more than the entire building, on a side street and walked in wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt, which for a Saudi prince is the equivalent of a disguise. He told the shelter coordinator he was there to assess conditions for a potential donation. That was a lie. He didn't know why he was there. Marisol was sitting in the common room when he walked in. She was 20 weeks pregnant by then. She was reading a Tagalog Bible that someone had donated, not because she was particularly religious, but because it was the only book in a language she could feel in. She recognized him before he recognized her. The man from the cold room, the one who knew why children cry. He didn't recognize her at all. And something about that, about being recognized by someone who didn't recognize you back, is its own kind of wound, small and precise, the kind you don't notice until you press on it later. She didn't say anything. He toured the facility, asked careful questions, wrote something in his phone, left. That should have been the end. But Khalid came back the following week, and the week after that. He brought supplies the second time, diapers and formula and boxes of dates, practical things, not performative things. The third time he brought a lawyer, not for Marisol specifically, for all of them. A lawyer who could review their cases, negotiate with the immigration authorities, contact families. A Saudi lawyer willing to represent migrant domestic workers, a rare creature, an almost mythical one, like finding a fish that breathes air. But money makes mythical things possible, and Khalid had money. During the lawyer's third visit, Marisol's case came up. The lawyer reviewed her file, asked questions, and Marisol answered in careful English, the kind she'd practiced at her vocational program, formal, precise, a little stilted, like someone walking in shoes that are the right size but not their own. Khalid was in the room. He was leaning against a wall, drinking tea from a paper cup, half listening. And then Marisol said something that made him stop drinking. She said, "I don't want to go home yet. I want my baby to be born where I can make sure the hospital won't lose us." It was the word lose, not turn us away, not refuse us. Lose. As if she understood, at a molecular level, that the machinery around her did not track people like her, and that being untracked meant being lost, and that being lost while giving birth was a particular kind of terror she was not willing to accept. Khalid put down his tea. After the meeting, he asked the shelter coordinator about her. Got her name, Marisol Reyes, and then the recognition hit. Not her face exactly, but the way she held herself. The posture of someone who is used to being in rooms that don't belong to her and making no disturbance. The blanket folder. Over the next month, Khalid's visits became more frequent and more focused. He told himself, and he told Amira, and he told his assistant, that he was overseeing his charitable contribution, that this was about the shelter, not about a specific person. This was philanthropy, governance, the kind of thing a responsible member of a powerful family should do. Amira, who had survived 53 years on this earth by knowing exactly when men were lying to themselves, said nothing. She just watched. What was actually happening was this. Khalid and Marisol were talking, not dating, not romancing, talking. In the common room, with other women present, with the fluorescent lights buzzing and the television playing Filipino soap operas in the background. They talked about food. Marisol told him about sinigang, in the sour soup her mother made with tamarind and pork, and Khalid told her about kabsa, and they discovered that both cultures believe rice is not a side dish, but the foundation upon which all other food is merely commentary. They talked about siblings. Khalid was the fourth of 6. He understood the mathematics of invisibility. They talked about cold rooms and crying children, and the specific loneliness of being in a building full of people who share your blood, but not your frequency. He never touched her, not once. Not a handshake, not a brush of fingers. The distance between them was measured in feet and centuries and every unwritten rule of both their worlds, and they both respected it, and the respect itself became a kind of intimacy. The way not touching someone can say more than touching ever could. Marisol was not falling in love. I want to be clear about that. Marisol was surviving. She was 25, pregnant, passportless, in a foreign country, facing criminal charges. Love was not a category her nervous system had bandwidth for. What she felt was something more dangerous. She felt seen. And being seen, when you have been invisible your whole life, is a drug that makes love look like decaf. Khalid was falling, hard, the way people fall who have never really been hungry, with total bewilderment. He dated women from royal families, socialites, a Swiss banker's daughter who spoke 4 languages and could ski. None of them had made him feel the thing Marisol made him feel, which was this: necessary, not desired, not admired, necessary. She needed help, and he could help, and the helping made him feel like his hands, which had never built anything his father hadn't designed, were finally doing something that mattered. Is that love? I don't know. Is it something that can become love? That's a different question. Now to the pregnancy. 26 weeks. Marisol's legal situation was still unresolved. The family she'd worked for, Nora and her husband, had filed a complaint. Under Saudi law, the complaint gave them leverage. Marisol had broken her contract. She was pregnant outside of marriage. She had been, according to their filing, morally unfit for domestic service. The language was surgical. It was designed to make her sound like a problem to be disposed of, not a person to be helped. Khalid hired a second lawyer, a more expensive one. This lawyer didn't just handle immigration cases. She handled cases that involved powerful families who didn't want to be embarrassed. She was Saudi, female, 46, wore glasses with tortoiseshell frames, and had the energy of someone who had been underestimated in every room she'd ever entered and had used that underestimation as a weapon every single time. Her name was Layla. She looked at Marisol's file and said one sentence. "This is not complicated. It is only expensive." She meant that the law was the law, and the law said Marisol could leave the country with her employer's consent or through a legal process that replaced that consent. But the process required lawyers and fees and court appearances and time, and all of those things cost money. And money was the one thing Marisol did not have, and Khalid had in grotesque abundance. So Khalid paid. Of course he paid. And that's when his family noticed. Financial transactions within the al-Rashid family were not private. They flowed through accounts monitored by the family office, a bureaucratic apparatus that tracked every riyal the way a hospital tracks blood pressure, constantly, dispassionately looking for anomalies. Khalid's payments to a law firm specializing in migrant worker cases was an anomaly, a significant one. His father, Faisal, summoned him. "Let me tell you about Faisal bin Tariq al-Rashid, because you need to understand the wall Khalid was about to walk into." Faisal was 63. He had built a construction empire by being the kind of man who could sit across a table from a government minister and make the minister feel like the smaller presence in the room. He was not cruel. Cruelty requires passion, and Faisal operated on something colder than passion: efficiency. He loved his children the way an architect loves a blueprint, with pride in the design and zero tolerance for deviation. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. Khalid told his father he was funding legal aid for a migrant workers' shelter. Faisal asked no follow-up questions. He simply said, "Be careful that your charity does not become someone else's story about you." That sentence had 3 layers. Khalid heard all of them, but he didn't stop. By week 30 of Marisol's pregnancy, the legal case had progressed. Layla had negotiated with Nora's family, traded favors, applied pressure through channels that existed in the gray space between law and social dynamics. The criminal complaint was being withdrawn, not out of compassion, but because Layla had made it clear that pursuing it would require the family to answer questions about passport confiscation and labor violations that they very much did not want to answer. Marisol was going to be free, legally free, free to leave. And that was the problem, because leaving meant going back to Taguig, back to the tin rooftops and the banana cue cart, and the cousin who still wanted her placement fee repaid with interest. Back to having a baby in a public hospital where the hallways smelled like bleach and prayers. Back to being invisible in her own country instead of invisible in someone else's. And Khalid, who had spent 3 months finding reasons to be at a shelter he had no business being at, now had to face the fact that the woman he'd been orbiting was about to leave his gravitational field entirely, and he had no right, none, zero, not a shred of legitimate claim to ask her to stay. He asked her to stay, not like that, not with a speech. He asked the way people ask when they're terrified of the answer, sideways with logistics. The hospital here is better equipped for your delivery. The lawyers still need you available for the final paperwork. It makes sense to stay another month. Marisol looked at him across a table in the shelter's common room. The TV was playing a news broadcast in Arabic. Someone's phone was ringing in another room, the default Samsung tone, over and over. Or she looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who has been offered practical reasons by a man who means something else entirely, and she knew, the way you know when a room is cold before anyone tells you, she knew what he was actually saying. 1 month, she said. The month changed everything, not because of a dramatic event, because of accumulation, the slow, devastating math of daily proximity between 2 people who are trying not to want each other and failing with increasing grace. Khalid brought her books, English novels, Tagalog poetry collections he'd ordered from a bookshop in Manila that shipped internationally. She read him passages from a Jose Garcia Villa poem, and he didn't understand all of it, but he understood the rhythm, the way the words fell like stones into water, Adreni watched her mouth move, and he was finished. Done. Completely and irreversibly done. Marisol felt it too, the terror of it, because she understood something Khalid didn't yet, that this feeling, whatever it was, existed in a world that had no room for it. She was a pregnant Filipina domestic worker. He was a Saudi prince. The distance between them was not geography, it was architecture. Centuries of built systems designed to keep people in their categories, and their categories were not adjacent. She told Davina, her friend from the holding room, about it late one night. Davina, who had seen more of the world's cruelty than most people could carry, listened and then said the most honest thing anyone said during this entire story. Marisol, the question is not whether he loves you. May rich men fall in love like they buy cars, fast and often. The question is what he will do when loving you costs him something he cannot buy back. Marisol heard that. She stored it somewhere deep beneath the hope, where the survival instinct keeps its sharpest tools. If stories like this, the ones that sit in your chest and ask you questions you can't easily answer, if that's what you come here for, then you're already one of us. Hit subscribe. This is where those stories live. Week 34. Marisol was enormous. The baby kicked constantly. She joked that it was training for a boxing career, and Khalid laughed, and the laugh was unguarded in a way that princes are trained never to be. And then Faisal found out. Not about the legal fees, about the visits, about the pregnant Filipina, about his son, the fourth child, and the one who had never given him a reason to worry, sitting in a migrant shelter reading poetry. This time, the meeting was not 11 minutes. Faisal brought Khalid's oldest brother, Turki, and his mother, Hessa. 3 people in a room designed for performance. A formal sitting room in the family compound. The kind of room where the furniture is arranged to remind you of your rank. Faisal sat in the largest chair. Hessa sat to his right, silent as stone but present, which was its own form of pressure. Turki stood by the window, which meant he'd been assigned the role of witness. Faisal did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He simply described what he knew, fact by fact, the way a surgeon describes an x-ray. Khalid's visits, the legal fees, the woman's name, age, nationality, pregnancy. May all of it laid out like evidence in a case that had already been decided. Then Faisal said, "You will not see her again. This is not a request." Khalid's hands were in his lap. He was looking at the rug, a Persian silk, Isfahan, 17th century, worth more than most houses. He studied the pattern, the way the threads interlocked, how something that beautiful required each thread to stay exactly where it was placed, and how a single thread out of position wouldn't ruin the rug, but would be visible to anyone who knew what to look for. He said, "I understand." He went home to his apartment in the Al-Alaya district. He sat in the dark for 2 hours. He did not call Marisol. He did not call Amira. He sat with his phone on the table in front of him, screen dark. And he thought about threads and rugs and what it means to stay where you're placed. At 10:30 that night, he picked up the phone and called Layla, the lawyer. "I need you to accelerate everything," he said, "and I need you to set up a trust." Here is what most people get wrong about this story when they hear it secondhand. They think Khalid defied his family, made a grand gesture, chose love over dynasty. He didn't. Not yet. What he did first was something more calculated and more frightening. He built a structure, a legal and financial architecture that would protect Marisol whether he was in her life or not. The trust would cover the child's medical expenses, education, housing. It was set up through a Bahraini holding company, layered enough that the Al-Rashid family office wouldn't flag it immediately. Layla handled the paperwork with the precision of someone building a bomb shelter, not hoping for disaster, but acknowledging its likelihood. Khalid did this because Davina's words, which Marisol had never repeated to him, were the exact right question. And some part of Khalid, the part that had grown up watching his father turn people into line items, already knew the answer. Loving Marisol might cost him everything he could not buy back. So he bought what he could first, made sure the foundation existed before he tried to build on it. Smart, cold, loving. All three at once. People are like that. He stayed away from the shelter for 2 weeks. Marisol noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed the way you notice when a room goes cold. Not all at once, but as an accumulating absence. She didn't call him. She didn't ask Amira. She folded clothes in the shelter. She ate. She felt the baby move. She read. She waited, but not for him. She waited the way she had always waited, for the next thing, whatever it was, because waiting for a specific person to save you is a luxury she had never been foolish enough to afford. 36 weeks. The baby was due in a month. Layla had secured Marisol's legal clearance. She could stay in Saudi Arabia through the birth, and afterward, she could leave with her child. Passport restored, criminal complaint withdrawn, everything resolved. Marisol was free, and on the morning she received the final paperwork, a Tuesday, bright 41 degrees outside, the kind of heat that makes the air look liquid. Khalid's car pulled up to the shelter. He walked in. He looked thinner. The skin under his eyes had the gray tint of someone who hasn't been sleeping well and has been substituting caffeine for rest. He was wearing a thobe this time. Formal, white, pressed. Not a disguise. An announcement. He asked to speak to Marisol alone. The shelter coordinator hesitated. Protocols, propriety, the awareness that a Saudi prince alone with a pregnant Filipina in any room was a photograph that could end careers. But Amira was there, and Amira said, "Let them talk. I'll be in the hallway." They sat across from each other in a small office that smelled like printer ink and cardboard. A desk between them. A window that looked out onto a parking lot. The most unromantic room in the history of rooms. Khalid said, "My father told me not to see you again." Marisol said nothing. "I told him I understood." Still nothing. Yeah, and I did understand. I understood everything he was afraid of. The scandal, the family name, the political complications. I understood it the way I've understood everything my whole life. As a blueprint someone else drew. He paused, pressed his thumb against the edge of the desk. Hard enough to leave a mark. But I've been sitting in my apartment for 2 weeks, and the only thing I can think about is a woman reading poetry in a fluorescent lit room. And I don't know what that means, except that every blueprint I've ever followed has led me to rooms I don't want to be in. And the only room I've ever wanted to be in is whatever room you're in. Marisol looked at him. She was 36 weeks pregnant. Her ankles were swollen. Her back ached in a way that had become so constant it was almost a companion. And she had 42 riyals and a plane ticket home and a future that was survivable, if not beautiful. She said, "What are you offering me, Khalid? Not as Shine, do you love me? Not, what about your family?" She asked the practical question, the survivor's question, because romantic declarations from powerful men are abundant and cheap, and she needed to know what was underneath the poetry. He told her about the trust, every detail, the Bahraini holding company, the medical coverage, the education fund. He told her it existed whether or not she ever spoke to him again, that it was already signed, already funded, already hers. Then he said, "And if you'll let me, I want to be there. Not as a benefactor, as..." He stopped, tried to find the word, couldn't. "I don't know the word for what I am to you," he said. I just know I'm it." Marisol closed her eyes. The printer in the corner hummed. Somewhere in the hallway, Amira coughed. "Your family will destroy this," Marisol said. "Not a question. Probably. And you'll lose things." "Yes." "Things you can't get back." "Yes." She opened her eyes. "Then you need to understand something. I am not a cause. I am not a project. I am not the thing that makes you feel good about being rich. I am a woman who is about to have a baby, And that baby will need a father or it will need nobody, but it cannot need a prince who visits when it's convenient and disappears when it's not. The silence after that sentence had weight, physical, architectural weight. Khalid stood up. And this is the moment I told you about at the beginning. He didn't kneel the way you're imagining. Not like a proposal. He knelt the way people kneel when they've been carrying something too heavy and they finally set it down. He knelt on the floor of that office and he said, I am sorry that you live in a world that made you have to say that. I am sorry that the system I was born into is the reason you're in this building. And I am sorry that my love might look like every other powerful man's love, temporary and decorative. I will spend whatever time you give me proving it isn't. 4 minutes. The apology was 4 minutes long. I won't give you all of it. Some things should stay in the room where they were said. Marisol did not say yes. She did not say I love you. She said, okay, 1 month, prove it. This is where a lesser story would montage, soft music, scenes of Khalid at doctor's appointments, of laughter over shared meals, of a man changing and a woman opening and a baby coming and everything golden. But this story has teeth. Faisal found out about the trust. The family office caught it, not the payments, but the legal structure, the Bahraini shell, the layers. It looked to the forensic accountants the Al-Rashid family employed like either money laundering or blackmail. They reported it to Faisal. Faisal called Turkey. Turkey called Khalid. The conversation with Turkey was different from the one with his father. Turkey was not cold. Turkey was furious in the way that only older brothers can be. The fury that comes from fear, from knowing that your younger sibling is about to step off a cliff and you cannot stop them and you are angry at the cliff itself. You set up a trust for a maid, Turkey said. For a child, Khalid said. For a maid's child. Khalid didn't respond to that. There was nothing to respond to. The word maid in Turkey's mouth was a wall, and you don't argue with walls. You go around them or you go through them. Father will cut you off, Turkey said. I know. Not just money. Off, out, name, everything. I know. Turkey was quiet for a long time. Then, is she worth it? Khalid thought about it. Really thought about it. Not as a romantic question, but as an accounting one. The kind his father would appreciate. What was he gaining? What was he losing? Whether the math worked. The math doesn't work, he said. But I've seen father's math, and it made him the richest empty man in Riyadh. I don't want his math. Turkey hung up, but he didn't tell Faisal about the trust. Not immediately. That delay, 3 days, maybe 4, was the closest thing to a blessing Khalid would receive from his family for a very long time. Marisol's water broke at 38 weeks, in the middle of the night in the shelter. Amira drove her to the hospital. Khalid met them there. He was wearing mismatched shoes, one black, one navy. He dressed in the dark and driven across the city at 90 miles an hour, and he stood in the hospital corridor smelling like toothpaste and adrenaline, and looking like a man who had never once in his life been this terrified. The labor lasted 14 hours. Khalid was not in the room. Marisol didn't want him there, and he respected that. And the respecting was hard, and the hardness was good. He sat in the waiting area on a plastic chair and drank vending machine coffee that tasted like regret, and stared at a television mounted to the wall, showing a football match he could not have identified under oath. At 7:42 in the morning, a nurse came out and said, "Boy, healthy. Mother is fine." Khalid cried, not dramatically, just tears falling, on a plastic chair in a fluorescent hallway while a football match played to no one. The boy was named Raphael. Marisol chose the name. Khalid didn't ask to be consulted. He understood that the naming was hers. Raphael was 6 pounds, 11 ounces. He had his mother's mouth and dark eyes that didn't look like anyone yet. The way all newborns are their own argument, not yet shaped by the faces that came before them. Khalid held him on the second day. Marisol placed Raphael in his arms, and Khalid held him the way he'd held his niece in that cold room 2 years earlier. Instinctively, without performance, adjusting the blanket around the baby's feet because the hospital room was too cold and nobody ever remembers. The circle. Do you feel it? What happened next took 2 years to unfold, and I'll give it to you in the compressed version because real life doesn't have a climax. It has a series of choices that accumulate into a shape you can only see from a distance. Faisal cut Khalid off, financially, socially, nominally. The process was surgical and total. Khalid lost access to the family accounts, the company positions, the compound. His name was not disowned publicly. That would create the scandal Faisal was trying to prevent. But privately, within the architecture of the family, Khalid became a ghost, a thread pulled from the rug. Khalid had his own savings, not billions, millions, enough to live well, not enough to live the way he'd been raised. He rented an apartment in Jeddah, a nice apartment, not a palace. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen where Marisol made sinigang and Khalid made kabsa, and they argued about rice. Joel, Marisol's former boyfriend, Raphael's biological father, learned about all of it through the Filipino Overseas Worker Network, which moves information faster than any intelligence agency on Earth. He sent a message through a mutual friend. He wanted to be part of Raphael's life. Marisol told Khalid. Khalid's response was immediate and uncharacteristic. Good. Not possessiveness, not jealousy. Good. And because Khalid understood something about fatherhood that many biological fathers don't. That a child benefits from more love, not exclusive love. That being a father is not a territory to be defended, but a verb to be performed daily without ownership. Joel visited once when Raphael was 9 months old. It was awkward and tender and human. Joel held his son and cried and thanked Khalid with a handshake that lasted too long, and Khalid thanked Joel for being the reason Raphael existed, and Marisol stood between these two men and felt, for perhaps the first time in her life, that she was not invisible but central. They did not marry immediately. Marisol refused. She told Khalid she would not marry him until she had her own income, her own money, her own ability to leave if she needed to. Not because she planned to leave, and because the ability to leave is the only thing that makes staying a choice instead of a sentence. She got a job, an administrative position at an international school in Jeddah, hired partly for her English, partly for her organizational skills. Skills she'd honed over years of running other people's households so efficiently that the running itself became invisible. She was good at it, quietly, ferociously good. Khalid started a small construction consultancy. Without his father's name, he had to earn contracts on competence alone, and it turned out, much to his own surprise, that he was competent, not brilliant, not visionary, competent, and competence, applied steadily, without the crutch of dynasty, builds something sturdier than brilliance ever does. They married in 2021. Small ceremony. Amira was there. Davina was there. Layla, the lawyer, was there, wearing her tortoiseshell glasses and a smile so rare that Amira took a photo of it. Turkey was there. He'd never told Faisal about the trust, and that silence had calcified into something like solidarity and then something like love. And he stood at his brother's wedding and ate kabsa and sinigang in the same meal and said it was the best food he'd ever had, and he wasn't lying. Faisal was not there. Hessa, Khalid's mother, was not there. But she sent a gift, a small gold bracelet wrapped in tissue paper, with no note. Marisol wore it to the ceremony. She wears it still. Raphael is 4 now. He speaks Arabic and Tagalog and the particular brand of English that children absorb from international schools. Fluid, unaccented, free. He has Marisol's focus and Khalid's instinct for noticing temperature. When someone is uncomfortable, he brings them a blanket, unprompted. Marisol sent her first paycheck home. Not Khalid's money, hers. Her mother bought a new cart for the banana queue. Her sister graduated from university. nursing, the practical choice, the math. Joel visits twice a year. He and Khalid watch football together and argue about teams, and it is strange and functional and real. This is not a fairy tale. Fairy tales end. This is a Tuesday. A life built from materials that were never supposed to fit together. Tin rooftops and marble floors, sinigang and kabsa, a uniform ironed with a 12-riyal travel iron, and a gold bracelet with no note. I want you to think about something, not about them, about you. Think about the last time someone saw you, not looked at you, saw you. When the difference is the difference between a glance and a recognition, between being in someone's field of vision and being in their understanding. Marisol spent 25 years being looked at and never seen. Khalid spent 29 years being seen for what he represented and never for what he wanted. They found each other in a room that smelled like printer ink, in a building no one powerful cared about. On a Tuesday, the biggest things in your life will not arrive announced. They will arrive disguised as ordinary days, ordinary rooms, ordinary people folding ordinary blankets in the corner of your attention. The only question is whether you're paying enough attention to notice when the room goes cold, and whether you're the kind of person who does something about it. Love is not the thing that saves you. Love is the thing that makes you worth saving, and you don't earn it by being extraordinary. You earn it by being in the room, present, awake, noticing what everyone else forgot to notice. A cold room, a crying child, a woman with a blanket. That's where it started. That's where everything starts. If this story did something to your chest, that pressure, that fullness, send it to one person who needs to feel it too. And if you haven't subscribed to Empire Stories TV yet, now's the moment, because the next story we're telling is about a woman who walked into a courtroom barefoot and walked out owning the company that tried to erase her. That one is going to keep you up tonight.